Why has insider risk management become so crucial? I'm not Alyssa Blackburn.
I'm not Mike Loader.
TechEdge starts now. Welcome back to TechEdge, presented by the team at AvePoint, where each episode we delve into the latest industry trends for business IT and their significance in today's landscape. Now, in this episode, we unveil how your organisation can avoid disaster by implementing insider risk mitigation strategies. Alyssa, this sounds like a big, scary cybersecurity one.
It is. So my example of this one here is, and it's such a small scale compared to what our guest is going to talk to us about today, but have you ever accidentally sent something like a little bit awkward or not quite right to a colleague?
I think I added kiss kiss, like XX to the end of an email just out of habit.
I once sent like a winky face on something that should never ever have had a winky face on it.
A lot,
it was
doesn't
like
it, a winky face.
super awkward. But if we multiply this really significantly and think about what it is that, the potential that our employees have for causing some kind of really awkward disaster, we want to put strategies in place to ensure that those kind of things don't happen. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have a person that I am extremely pleased to describe as the expert's expert, Joanne Klein, CEO of Nexnovus. Joanne, welcome so much.
It's good to see you. Can you define insider risk management for us?
Yes, thank you for having me on the show. Insider risk management is really about finding and mitigating, hopefully stopping security threats from people within an organization. So we're talking employees, vendors, partners, anyone who might either accidentally or maliciously, in fact, misuse sensitive information that's in an organization and then exfiltrate it out. So as you can imagine, this can have potentially very negative consequences for an organization, from monetarily, like financial loss, regulatory fines, but even damaged business reputations in some, extreme cases.
Okay, well, let's go through some of the key components of it. I'm picturing, as we sort of highlighted at the beginning, emails being one door for this stuff up to happen, these stuff ups to happen. Take us through a little bit more.
Sure. Emails is definitely one area where, you can send information that maybe is sensitive or you shouldn't be sending outside of the organization, sharing documents from SharePoint and OneDrive that are sensitive in nature, having a Teams chat with someone, and you're sharing, personal information on there. Those are all very practical examples of things that just happen routinely in the modern workplace. And I think the challenge with any insider risk solution is balancing the need, because it is monitoring activity to detect these things, balancing user privacy with organizational risk. And you need to maintain an ethical workplace environment while doing so, and ensuring you have the proper controls in place.
Yeah, interesting. Joanne, why do you think that insider risk management has become increasingly important for businesses, especially in today's environment?
I think for two key reasons. One is the sheer scale of the digital footprint now. I think the numbers Microsoft was touting last year was an additional 2 million files per minute in the SharePoint and OneDrive service alone.
Wow.
So that's just massive. And as that digital footprint grows, so do the data risks that go along with that. And an organization's data is really one of its most valuable assets. So protecting it and preventing its loss is a very important priority. I think what compounds that, though, is limited resources that companies have nowadays to be able to monitor these things and take appropriate actions. Admins are being asked to do, more with less, as they say. And so it compounds the problem is, how do you actually detect these risks that are happening across your environment? So in steps some of these more intelligent insider risk management solutions.
Yeah, well, let's get into a little bit more about that. How can companies identify and, of course, mitigate those insider risks effectively without overloading these admins?
Well, first of all, the tool needs to be able to handle the scale of the data that is coming at it, and it needs to be automated and to be able to kind of react on the fly without relying on an admin to manually check some audit log or some report after the fact. So many of the really good insider risk management tools are continually assessing data-related activity that end users are doing. And they are able to adapt to changing conditions. So for example, if an employee hands in their resignation, that is a trigger for possibly a data leakage scenario. So, that person may start emailing themselves some documents that they had created before to their personal Gmail account. So in that scenario, it would consider that user or that employee at an elevated risk and may be able to adapt accordingly to that, rather than relying on an admin to manually maybe do some things for employees that are departing. So having that level of automation and intelligence in the tool is very, very critical to be able to manage this at scale.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know, now that we've outlined this employee, or potential user, what role does employee training and I guess awareness play in managing these insider risks? Because it is a big part of it, is the team that you're working with.
It absolutely is, and I would say end user awareness is a critical component to this. Most employees definitely want to do the right thing, but they are your first and your last line of defense. So in its simplest form, insider risk management is an informed end user. But ensuring end users are aware of these things is where the work comes in, is making sure they understand the proper data handling controls for the data that they work with day to day. And I would say just building that into a corporate culture. Start with the onboarding process, have recurring, attestations that employees have to do, so they're not surprised by, the I guess, behavior you're asking them to do to properly handle their data. They should understand they're dealing with sensitive data. I shouldn't be sharing that with
outside parties.
A customer, perhaps.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And also, I would say a critical component to this, because sometimes employees are a little uneasy with this type of a tool. Mm-hmm. So maintaining that trust with employees is really important, right? Making sure you have the right privacy controls in place. Like, many of these tools have things like anonymization, so the investigators can't actually see the user that maybe is doing the data-related risky activity. They're just assessing the activity. It's removing the bias from the investigator. They don't know who it is. You're protecting the privacy of the individual who's having their activity monitored. Having those controls in place, proper auditing, is critical, I think, to have the comfort and confidence of end users working with the activity, that their privacy is being handled in an appropriate manner.
I think that's a really good point, because again, when we need our employees' participation in this, tell them what we're doing. If we're not doing anything wrong, there shouldn't be any issue with being really upfront about it. So, having that trust go both ways, by telling them what we're going to do, but by also expecting them to meet the requirements as well. It really is a two-way street on that. Joanne, can you tell us though, because I think examples are always a great way of describing this. Can you share some examples of where insider risk management could have helped? Where maybe, things weren't set up the way they could have been, and if they'd had something in place, could have solved a much bigger problem.
Yeah, absolutely. One is a public I guess, data exfiltration that happened, and that was in May of 2023, Tesla, there was a data breach by 2 former employees where nearly 100 gigabytes of confidential documents in total were leaked. And so that comprised, employee personal information, production secrets of Tesla. I mean, this is confidential information that really caused a lot of damage to the company's reputation, potential fines and lawsuits. So my first thought when I read that was an insider risk management solution would be able to detect what is confidential in an organization. It's really important to be able to discern what's confidential versus what's just benign, just general documentation. Those 2 types of content need to be treated very differently. One, it perhaps wouldn't matter if you share that externally. The other one, it may matter a great deal. So having the proper classification of your documents and then the monitoring that goes along with it, you would be able to detect, in this case, those 2 former employees were downloading things that were outside of their normal activity, which is another aspect of insider risk management solution. It knows what the organizational and peer norms are for users. I mean, it's smart enough to detect that. So it would probably elevate these 2 employees with an elevated risk because of that. Yeah. Another one is the classic departing employee scenario. There's the notion of who owns the content I've created I've been at an organization, and often an expectation of ownership of said content really comes together to set up a departing employee to take a lot of that content with them. A very common scenario that I believe insider risk management is purpose-built to try to protect against, because again, downloading confidential information could cause harm to an organization. You really need to protect against that, and insider risk management can detect things like that. And another very...
Joanne, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're running out of time. You've been going into such detail for us. We appreciate it, but I'm watching the clock and my producer's saying, we got to keep moving. But thank you so much for going into all of that detail with us. And of course, highlighting a little bit more about this interesting topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
There you go. In depth.
Absolutely, but so important. So because we deal with so much data and so much information, and we put such trust in our employees, as we should, I think the points that Joanne raised there are absolutely critical for every organisation to be aware of and then to be actively doing something about.
Good stuff from you as always. And of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in. Hopefully you've learned something from our discussion today. This is Ticker. We'll be right back.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.